In medieval England, the law didn't just protect the king's crown, it protected one animal above almost all others. Not the deer, not the wolf, the boar. Kill one without permission, and the punishment could be brutal. That single fact tells you everything you need to know about an animal that has been worshipped as royalty, feared as a monster, and is now hunted as vermin across 3 continents at once. The wild boar shaped how ancient armies trained for combat. It decided which forests kings were allowed to enter. It crossed an ocean in the cargo hold of an empire and became one of the most destructive invasive species on the planet. But here's the part almost nobody puts together. The very traits that made the boar a legendary opponent for princes and knights are the exact same traits, now making it nearly impossible to stop. Intelligence, adaptability, and a reproductive rate that laughs at every method humans have thrown at it. This is the story of the wild boar. It starts millions of years before the first spear was ever sharpened, and it ends with a modern battle that, right now, humans are losing. Consider what separates a truly dangerous wild animal from a merely large one. Bears hibernate. Wolves avoid populated areas. Big cats need vast, undisturbed territory to survive. The wild boar breaks every one of those rules. It doesn't need wilderness. It doesn't fear the edge of a farm or a suburb. And unlike almost any other animal its size, it can turn a forest, a cornfield, or a golf course into a home within a single season. So why has this particular animal survived, adapted, and multiplied through so many attempts to control it? The story begins in the forests of Eurasia. Sus scrofa, the species we know as the wild boar, emerged millions of years ago in Southeast Asia and eventually spread across the Eurasian continent, descending from ancient Suid ancestors that once roamed prehistoric woodlands. Unlike its more specialized relatives, the boar kept a body built for versatility, a dense, muscular frame, a skull engineered for digging, crushing, and defense, tusks that keep growing for its entire life, curling upward into weapons sharp enough to gut a predator in a single motion. Wild boar are not simply strong, they're tactically dangerous. A cornered boar doesn't simply panic. It reacts fast, turns toward the threat, and commits. Hunters have described boar attacks as feeling less like an animal encounter and more like being charged by a small armored vehicle. That combination, raw power paired with genuine intelligence, is what first caught the attention of ancient civilizations, not as a source of meat, as a symbol of something far more dangerous. Long before boars were hunted for sport, they were feared as omens. In Greek mythology, the Caledonian boar was sent by an offended goddess to punish an entire kingdom, a monster so devastating that heroes from across the land had to unite just to bring it down. In Celtic tradition, the boar represented ferocity and battlefield courage so completely that warriors carved its image onto their shields and helmets, hoping to inherit its fury. Why did so many unconnected cultures land on the same symbol? Because they were watching the same behavior. Unlike a wolf, which will typically flee from humans, a boar backed into a corner does the opposite. It attacks. That single behavioral trait, present in nearly every wild boar population on Earth, is what turned a forest animal into a legend. But mythology eventually gave way to something more literal: political power. And that shift happened first in the royal courts of medieval Europe. Here's what makes boar hunting different from hunting almost any other animal in the medieval world. A stag will run for miles before it tires. A wolf will slip away into brush the moment it senses danger. A boar does neither. It assesses. It waits for the hounds to close the distance, and then it commits to the fight on its own terms, often inflicting serious wounds on both dogs and hunters before it goes down. That single behavioral difference is why medieval nobility didn't just hunt the boar. They revered it as an opponent worthy of a king. Picture a European nobleman in the 12th century. Land defines his status. Titles define his lineage. But there's a third marker of power that outranks both in daily life: what he's allowed to hunt. Across medieval Europe, monarchs began designating vast tracts of woodland as protected royal forests, land legally set aside for the hunting pleasure of the crown and its favored nobles. Inside those boundaries, the wild boar sat near the very top of the list of protected game, ranked alongside red deer as one of the most prestigious animals a hunter could pursue. Poaching royal game could bring severe punishment, and the boar was among the most prestigious animals in the royal hunt. The message was unmistakable. This animal belongs to power. Now picture the hunt itself. Packs of specially bred hounds track the boar through dense undergrowth for hours. When it's finally cornered, it doesn't run. It turns, plants its feet, and waits. The nobleman dismounts. He carries a spear, sometimes just a long hunting knife, and he's expected to face the animal directly, on foot, at close range. More than one European king died attempting exactly this. The boar hunt wasn't a demonstration of dominance over a passive animal. It was a genuine test of nerve against a creature capable of killing the hunter first. That's precisely why it became the aristocratic proving ground it was. But greatness has a cost, and in one country, the price of turning the boar into a royal trophy was the animal's near-total disappearance. In the forests of Britain, centuries of exclusive royal hunting slowly tightened around the boar like a noose. Only the king and his closest allies could legally kill one. Everyone else was locked out. You'd expect that kind of protection to help a species survive. Instead, it did the opposite, because royal hunting never stopped. Even as the boar's numbers quietly thinned across the countryside, the crown kept hunting, treating the declining population as an entitlement rather than a resource to manage. Add habitat loss as English woodlands were cleared for farmland, and the pressure became fatal. By the end of the medieval period, Britain had effectively lost its wild boar. The animal protected by kings was eventually hunted out of the very forests those kings controlled. English aristocrats didn't stop wanting the hunt, though. They simply crossed the channel and kept going. Wealthy sportsmen began traveling to Austria, Bohemia, France, Germany, and Hungary, staying as guests of local nobility purely for the chance to hunt boar the way their ancestors once had at home. Formal hunts became elaborate rituals, complete with specific hunting uniforms, dozens of hound handlers, and, in some accounts, hundreds of local peasants hired simply to flush the animal from cover. The boar had become an international pursuit, a shared obsession stretching across borders and languages. But while European royalty was formalizing the hunt into ceremony, on the other side of the world, wild boar were quietly becoming something else entirely. Not prey, not symbol. A daily, unavoidable presence woven into the fabric of everyday rural life. In Japan, the relationship between people and wild boar, known locally as inoshishi, predates organized rice farming itself. Long before formal agriculture spread across the archipelago, communities were already contending with boar raiding early food stores and disturbing settlements. As farming expanded, so did the conflict. Villages built long wooden and stone barriers specifically to keep boar out of rice paddies, structures so extensive that some stretches still exist today as historical landmarks. This wasn't occasional conflict. It was a permanent generational negotiation between farmers and an animal that refused to leave. Then, during Japan's rapid industrial modernization in the late 19th century, something unexpected happened. As forests were cleared and hunting intensified to fuel the country's economic transformation, wild boar populations collapsed across large parts of the main islands. For decades, boar became a minor concern, reduced to isolated pockets in remote mountain regions. It looked for a while like the story was ending the same way it had in Britain. It wasn't. Rural populations across Japan began aging and shrinking through the late 20th century. Fewer people meant fewer hunters. Fewer hunters meant less pressure on boar populations. And an animal that had been pushed to the margins found the door wide open again. Today, wild boar are documented in nearly every Japanese prefecture except the northernmost island. Populations have expanded dramatically in recent decades, and researchers now estimate crop damage from wild boar in Japan runs into tens of millions of dollars annually. The comeback wasn't driven by conservation efforts or protected breeding programs. It was driven by exactly the same adaptability that first made the animal legendary. Give it an opening, any opening, and the wild boar will take it. That lesson was about to repeat itself on a scale nobody in Japan or Europe could have imagined. Because an ocean away, wild boar were about to be introduced to a continent that had never faced them before. And what followed would become one of the most consequential wildlife invasions in modern history. European colonists brought domestic pigs to the Americas as livestock almost from the earliest voyages, animals meant to feed settlements, not roam free. But pigs escape. They always have. And free-ranging domestic pigs, left to fend for themselves in unfamiliar forests, don't stay domestic for long. Within a few generations in the wild, escaped domestic pigs can become feral, developing many of the physical traits and behaviors associated with wild boar: bristled coats, elongated snouts, aggressive temperament. What Americans call feral hogs today aren't all pure Eurasian wild boar, though. Many are descendants of domestic pigs. Some are descendants of introduced Eurasian boar, and many populations contain a mixture of both. Then, in the early 20th century, hunting enthusiasts in the United States deliberately imported true Eurasian wild boar and released them into private hunting reserves, hoping to recreate the prestige hunt Europeans had practiced for centuries. It didn't stay contained. Escaped and released boar interbred freely with feral domestic pigs already established across the American South, creating hybrid populations that combined the boar's raw toughness with the pig's rapid breeding cycle. The result was, in evolutionary terms, close to a perfect invasive organism. Here's what makes that combination so dangerous. A female wild pig can begin breeding before she's even a year old. She can produce 2 litters annually, each containing 4 to 6 piglets, sometimes more. Run the math forward across a few unchecked generations, and a handful of escaped animals can become tens of thousands within a decade. Today, feral swine are established in at least 38 U.S. states, with a national population estimated at somewhere between 5 and 6 million animals, and that number continues to expand. The USDA now puts the annual cost of feral swine damage in the United States at more than $3.4 billion, including agricultural losses, infrastructure damage, and control costs, with the majority of that hitting crop producers directly. A single wild pig can tear up several square feet of soil in a matter of minutes, rooting for food and leaving farmland looking like it's been plowed by machinery overnight. Now imagine you're a farmer in rural Texas. You plant a field of corn in the spring, watch it grow through the summer, and one night a sounder of 30 wild pigs moves through under cover of darkness. By morning, an entire section of your harvest is gone, not eaten so much as obliterated, the ground churned and unusable. It's not the first time this season, and you already know it won't be the last. You call it in. You're not alone. Neighboring farms report the same pattern almost every week during growing season, the pigs moving in loose, shifting sounders that seem to know exactly which fields have gone unpatrolled longest. Reports like yours are filed by the thousands every single year across the American South. Wildlife agencies have thrown nearly every method imaginable at the problem: trapping, aerial hunting from helicopters, coordinated ground removal programs involving federal, state, and local agencies working in tandem, and the population still grows. Why? Because trapping and shooting individual animals barely dents a population that can replace its losses within a single breeding season. You'd need to remove the overwhelming majority of any local group just to keep the numbers flat, and most control programs fall well short of that threshold. The same reproductive advantage that let a handful of escaped pigs seed a multi-million animal population is the exact same advantage that makes eliminating them look nearly impossible. But reproduction is only half of what makes this animal so hard to stop. The other half is intelligence. Wild boar are remarkably intelligent and adaptable animals. They learn trap patterns and avoid them. They shift to nocturnal activity, specifically to dodge daytime hunting pressure. They communicate danger to other members of their group. Researchers studying boar behavior near populated areas have documented individuals that appear to recognize and evade specific vehicles associated with wildlife control agencies. This isn't blind instinct. It's learned, adaptive behavior, refined across generations that have been actively hunted by humans for thousands of years. In a strange way, centuries of royal hunts in medieval Europe may have done more than create legend. They may have selected for exactly the kind of wary, tactical animal that today's wildlife agencies are struggling to outsmart. And the crisis isn't confined to farmland. It reaches into public health. Wild boar and feral pigs can carry and transmit diseases capable of devastating domestic livestock industries, including highly lethal viruses that have already caused catastrophic losses to pork production in other parts of the world. Wildlife agencies monitor wild boar populations, partly for exactly this reason, aware that a disease outbreak moving through a dense, unmanaged population could trigger economic damage extending far beyond agriculture alone. The threat isn't hypothetical. It's a matter of when the right pathogen finds the right population, not if. Consider what happened after a major nuclear disaster forced the evacuation of a wide stretch of farmland in Fukushima, Japan in 2011. With people gone and agricultural land suddenly abandoned, wild boar didn't retreat. They expanded, moving into the vacated zone in growing numbers over the following years. Researchers who later studied the area also documented something unexpected. Genetic analysis found clear evidence of interbreeding between abandoned domestic pigs and the local wild boar population, with some individuals showing measurable domestic pig ancestry passed down through multiple generations. It's not that every boar in the zone became a hybrid. It's that the introgression was fast, sustained, and traceable, a small accidental preview of exactly the kind of scenario wildlife biologists worry about at a much larger scale. Remove human pressure, even briefly, and the boar doesn't just survive, it seizes the opening and multiplies. That single case in Fukushima captures something true about this animal everywhere it exists. It isn't simply persistent. It's opportunistic in a way few other large mammals can match, ready to expand the instant conditions allow it, whether that opening comes from a disaster, a policy gap, or simply a few unmonitored acres of forest. Across the globe, the same pattern is now repeating on nearly every continent boar have reached. In parts of Australia, feral pig populations descended from colonial-era livestock cause extensive damage to native ecosystems and agricultural land. In regions of India, wild boar increasingly clash with farming communities as habitat shrinks and populations grow. In Canada, boar escaped or released from exotic livestock farms have established wild populations that are now expanding across the prairie provinces, a problem authorities are racing to contain before it mirrors what happened in the United States. One animal, multiple continents, the same pattern repeating again and again. Zero fully successful long-term solutions anywhere. To understand why every solution keeps falling short, it helps to look at the one place that has been fighting this exact war the longest: rural Japan. For decades, local governments there have tried nearly every method now being tested elsewhere in the world, and the results tell you everything about how stubborn this animal really is. Electric fencing around farmland works, but only where it's maintained constantly and boar quickly learn to test weak points at the edges. Live trapping requires bait, patience, and near-daily monitoring, and even successful trap lines only remove a fraction of a local population before the next breeding season replaces the loss. Some municipalities have turned to professional hunting cooperatives, paying bounties per animal removed, a system that keeps numbers from exploding further but has never come close to eliminating the problem outright. What Japan's experience really reveals is a pattern that keeps repeating everywhere this animal has spread. Effort scales the population down. It rarely scales it to zero. Now picture a wildlife officer in rural Georgia called out to a residential neighborhood at the edge of a forest reserve. A sounder of boar has been rooting through backyards at night, tearing up lawns, breaking into unsecured trash. Homeowners are frightened. Some have small dogs. One family reports a boar standing its ground at the edge of their driveway rather than fleeing when approached. The officer sets traps, removes a dozen animals over 2 weeks. Locals feel relief. Then, 4 months later, the calls start again. Because removing a dozen animals from a sounder that can replace 50 in a single season barely slows the clock, it resets it. That single dynamic in miniature is the entire global crisis. Everywhere from the American South to the Australian outback, agencies are fighting a species whose reproductive math simply outpaces the resources thrown against it. Some regions have shifted strategy entirely, treating wild boar not as a problem to eliminate, but as a resource to manage. Licensed hunting programs in Spain and other parts of Europe allow tens of thousands of animals to be harvested annually, turning population control into a regulated industry rather than an emergency response. Other regions are experimenting with fertility control research, aiming to slow reproduction rather than simply removing individual animals after the fact. The same animal produces radically different outcomes depending purely on where in the world you're standing. In parts of rural Spain, a regulated boar hunt is a source of local income, tourism, and traditional cuisine, with wild boar meat appearing on menus as a point of regional pride. In suburban Georgia, that same species is a nuisance call to animal control. In the Fukushima exclusion zone, it's an unmonitored population multiplying inside land humans were forced to abandon. In a Japanese mountain village, it's a decades-old adversary that farmers have learned, out of necessity, to coexist with rather than defeat. One species. 4 completely different relationships with humanity, all happening on the same planet at the same time. And some researchers argue that the honest answer is uncomfortable. This may not be a problem with a clean solution. It may be a permanent negotiation, the same negotiation Japanese farmers have been having with inoshishi for centuries, just now playing out on farmland across multiple continents at once. The wild boar was worshipped as a monster in the ancient myth, guarded as royal property in medieval forests, and is now labeled an invasive threat across the modern world. But the animal itself hasn't changed at all. What changed is us, where we built farms, where we cleared forests, where we imported animals for sport, and then lost control of them completely. Every generation has looked at the wild boar and seen a reflection of what it valued. Nobility saw prestige, farmers saw survival, modern agriculture sees liability. And somewhere in a Texas cornfield tonight, a sounder of wild pigs is moving through the dark, doing exactly what this species has always done best, adapting faster than we can respond. If you found this story surprising, check out our video on the history of wolves, the animal that humans spent centuries trying to eliminate entirely, and what happened when we actually succeeded. The link is right here. And if you want more stories like this every week about the animals quietly shaping the world around us, subscribe. See you in the next one.